Okay, I think there's a good amount of us online now, so we'll get kind of cracking with today's event. So thanks everyone who's joined us. My name's Hayley, I run events here at Makers. And today we're going to be sharing some information with you about our part-time course. Yeah, hopefully sharing some information so you can just learn a little bit more about it. What are the differences from that and our regular bootcamp? And also hearing from one of our students about her first-hand experience of the course. So a couple of things before we get into the Q&A. If you do have a question for any of our panel today, if you could just write it in the Q&A function at the bottom, and we'll kind of just go through them one by one. And if you see a question that you also would like answered, just click the little thumbs up button and we'll be able to get to the kind of top priority questions first. So I'm joined today by Kay, who's our head of training, Rachel, who's one of our course managers, and Ellen, who's one of our part-time students. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of cover all bases between the four of us. So if you're new to Makers in general, just a few things about us. We were the first coding bootcamp in Europe. We've got over 8 years of experience in training people online and in person. There's an alarm going off outside my building, so hopefully you can't hear that. All of our coaches have been professional developers before. They've worked at companies including Deloitte, Facebook, and loads of other really cool companies. So they know their stuff, basically. And the last thing from me, I guess, before we start the main Q&A section is that obviously we run a lot of different events here at Makers. If you'd like to see our part-time students graduate, that event is on February the 26th. And what happens during that event is they'll kind of showcase the projects they've been working on in the last couple of weeks of the course. Ellen is working on towards that now, so you'll be able to see what their group have made. So I'll drop the link in the chat so you can sign up to that if you'd like to attend. That's everything from me at the moment, so I'm going to hand over to Kay, who will tell us a few more details about the part-time course.
Thanks, Hayley. Hi, everyone. I'm Kay. I'm Makers Head of Training. I look after all of the coaching and course development at Makers. And it's also been my pleasure to do some of the coaching with Ellen and the rest of our first part-time cohort. We started running part-time a year ago. And today I'm going to share with you some of the key details of our part-time course. And in keeping with our educational approach, I'm not going to tell you everything. So get your questions fired up and ready. So I'm proud to say that our courses are demanding but rewarding. Part-time is not part effort, not for you, not for us. People study with us on part-time because they want to change their lives, but without compromise. They're committed to their current jobs, at least for now, or their families. And part-time is for people who won't give up either on their growth or on their commitments. And we're proud to match the commitments of our students with the quality of our training as well, the dedication of our coaches and of our support in finding a role in the industry. Our weeks start on Sundays at 9 a.m. with either a coach-led kickoff, the material of that week, or a workshop. And at middays, we optionally meditate. And the rest of the day, you work through our programming challenges in pairs. Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, we meet at 6:30 for the same. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you can also join remote yoga with Dana, our Chief Joy Officer. You really need to take care of yourself when you're challenging yourself this much. And we do this for 28 weeks plus a 1-week half-term break. And in that time, we cover everything we cover in our full-time course, including programming fluency, test-driven development and architecture, back-end and front-end web development, and a big helping of teamwork using agile practices. This culminates in a 4-week final project on the topic, and the stack you choose as a team. But our work doesn't finish until you get a job. I really mean that. We work really hard to get people jobs. We run ongoing workshops with technical and careers-focused coaches to help you upskill even further, as well as one-to-one sessions. For each interview you get offered, we assign you a coach to help you navigate that process without, of course, doing the work for you, but just to support you in understanding what's going on and how to make the best of yourself in that. And we also partner with employers to secure a number of jobs that only Makers devs have access to. And I'd love to introduce you to Ellen to tell you just a little bit more. And unfortunately, Ellen won't be able to tell you about the job hunting support because partly because she's only just finishing the course now, but mostly because she's actually recently been offered a software engineering job from her current employer. And so she's our first employed, although I should say has been employed all the time, employed as a software engineer to be a part-time maker. Ellen, take it away.
Hi. I was going to talk a little bit about kind of how I came to Makers, chose Makers, and then a little bit about what it's been like being on the course. So a bit of background about me is that some many years ago, I studied English at university, and I actually worked in the arts for several years after that. But right now, and for a few more weeks, I'm a project manager at a company that provides box office software as a service to theatres and arts organisations. So kind of I crossed the line from the arts into something a little bit more technical. But although it's a software company, I really want to be clear, my role there is client facing and it's not a technical role. I didn't come into the course as someone who had experience in coding. I've been with my current employer for 4.5 years, and at the start of 2020, I'd just completed the biggest project I'd ever worked on, and I knew there weren't really any challenges as big as that one that were waiting around the corner. So I was starting to already think a bit about what's next. And then, of course, coronavirus happened, and I was furloughed, and I knew I wanted to do something useful with that time, and I'd intended for a while to learn coding. And I'd had some opportunities in my job to shadow and work with sort of developers. So I thought, that's really interesting. It looks like something I want to do a bit more of. So I spent a couple of months on furlough learning Python. And then I got called back from furlough, and I didn't feel thrilled about that. I kind of realized that was a big signal that it was time for a change. So that was the point where I started to think, like, how can I keep the coding up? And I started to think about boot camps. I knew about Makers because some graduates from Makers full-time had actually gone to work at the company that I'm at before, and we'd seen them really kind of flourish, and they'd always spoken really highly of their experience at Makers. So I started looking at Makers, and everything there was sort of full-time, and I thought, this isn't really going to work. I wasn't comfortable with kind of the cost and the risk of giving up my full-time job. I was also kind of holding out hope that I would be able to stay on with my current employer if I managed to make it through a coding bootcamp. And just at that moment, Makers announced they were piloting a part-time course, and I sort of went, right, this is seize the moment time, and I applied. And it was only a sort of a couple of weeks after that, really, that I was starting the course and starting the sort of the journey that we're on, and that was back in, I want to say July. Kay, was it July? It's a long time and no time ago. And yeah, I mean, since then it's been an amazing journey. I'm not going to pretend that studying part-time alongside a job is easy. It's not. It's hard. I was really lucky that the first few months of the course I was working part-time. There are people in my cohort who've been full-time for the entire course. And I've been back to full-time from about the start of this year. I'm kind of in awe that they've kept it together, but they have. And I don't think that would have been possible for us to do anywhere other than at Makers. The emphasis that Makers have on well-being alongside the learning was essential for me, and I think essential for other people in my cohort. The coaches have been really understanding about the days when I was just really tired from work, or I needed to be late because I had other things I had to get done from my day job. And also the cohort has got a really sort of supportive atmosphere. We do check in about kind of how we're doing and what our energy levels are. And so if you are sort of thinking about, is it doable? Yeah, it's tough. It's a long journey, but you're supported all the way along that journey. And I think that's something that's really valuable as part of like the overall Makers experience. And it has also been really fun and rewarding. So just a couple of highlights would be kind of any project where you get like a tangible moment of like your code doing something. So there's a project where you sort of build some code for like a very basic kind of takeaway, like meal order app, and you integrate it with something that sends a text message to your phone. And when you get your code to send a text message to your phone, it's just like, it feels like you've done a little magic trick. So that was really fun. And also kind of in the web development module, where you really start to see a site that you've built come together and be something you can interact with and, you know, pretend to be a user of. It's really, you know, it's really rewarding and satisfying. And then another highlight, I think, was the week where we switched from Ruby, where we'd spent sort of most of sort of good solid couple of months of the course, to JavaScript, and everything's suddenly really alien again. Like you go back to sort of, you know, day one when you sat down at Codecademy and we're looking at Ruby being like, what is Ruby? But the thing that's really different is when that happens in the course and you're swapping from Ruby to JavaScript, you realize how much you've already learned about just kind of how programming languages work, and you can see kind of the similarities as well as the differences, and you start picking it up so much faster. And that was a really sort of exciting moment of recognizing how far you've come. Yes, still a long way to go, but you can feel the progress that you've made. So yeah, those are a couple of my highlights from the course so far. Yeah, not much longer to go on it now.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ellen. So we're going to dive in straight to the questions in the Q&A. So thank you to those of you who have submitted them so far. So the first question from Jess is asking, how strongly did you feel about coding before Makers, and how has your enjoyment of it changed?
I like I said, sort of messed around on my couple of months of furlough with Python, which is not the language that's used at Makers. So I knew I did kind of enjoy it. I enjoyed the problem solving aspect. I enjoyed the kind of tinkering around with it. I think what's changed about my enjoyment of it now is that I have more of a kind of a process. So it's a bit like, I don't know, going from messing around with some tools in a shed to sort of knock together a bit of furniture, and actually having a sense of like a process and a craft for making that furniture, and having you know, a proper knowledge of how to use the tools in smarter ways. So I guess it sort of takes it from being perhaps a little bit sort of messier and scrappier fun to being something that is more kind of rigorous but very satisfying as a result of that. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Ellen. We've had similar questions asked so often. Like, that's such a nice, articulate way of answering it. So I'm going to steal that for future events. So thank you very much. The next question I'm going to direct to Kay. They're asking, how do bootcamp grads compare to CS grads in the eyes of employers?
Yeah, great question. In short, very well, but a bit different. Some employers, you know, for instance, you know, grad schemes, all the companies have grad schemes, and the salaries there tend to be a little bit lower, and the entry tends to be a bit more of a sort of year into software engineering. Makers devs are seen as fully fledged junior engineers and are ready to go into teams and start contributing, because we focus so much more on the skills that a junior developer will need to apply in their first week and month. Versus a computer science degree, which focuses very heavily on computer science background, but actually needs a much longer on-ramp actually into being productive in a team and in an organization. And so different, but I think very well, and particularly very competitively.
Cool, thank you, Kate. I'm going to ask Rachel as well, actually, because obviously you see a lot of the applications, and sometimes we have CS grads who also come and do the course. Could you maybe talk a little bit about, you know, the reason why some of those people have come onto the course?
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, like Kay said, you do in computer science degrees, you're going to do a lot of computer science theory, which is something I guess we don't touch on as much or at all. Okay, maybe you can confirm or deny that later. But they're looking for like projects. They perhaps haven't like built lots of things that they can put in a portfolio that they can demonstrate to companies about how they can, you know, create their own code. So coming to Makers allows you to do that. Working as part of a team as well. You might have been doing quite lots of solo work on your degree. So getting the chance to sort of like collaborate with others is another reason. And yeah, to get the on the job sort of like training so that you can, yeah, go straight into a job and be sort of a great member of the team straight away. yeah, I think that's normally the reasons.
Cool, thank you. So the next question from Richard is asking, in addition to the scheduled sessions, is there need to do additional work to make the best of the bootcamp? Ellen, did you find yourself doing much extra work outside of the main course?
So Kate kind of outlined the contact hours are the Sunday mornings and then the Monday through Thursday evenings. We had Fridays and Saturdays as kind of designated sort of self-guided study time, and that included, there were various sort of coding challenges that we were set over the course of the first few modules to kind of specifically focus on in that time. So you'd sort of, on the Thursday, the coach would kind of introduce the challenge, we'd talk a little bit about it, make some sort of plans of how we tackle it, and then individually go off and work on that through like choosing our own hours for that on like the Friday or the Saturday, and then come back on the Sunday morning to kind of review it and discuss how it had gone. So there's definitely almost specific work set aside for that time. The thing I'd say is that it is like within the realms of like not just failing to do the work and not getting anything out of it, it is your time to choose kind of how much to plow into it. And the challenges are really designed around the idea of like, this is the sort of where you definitely should be trying to get to, but then here are some stretch things if you want to take it further. And they also have quite a bit of flexibility to kind of, if you think of an interesting direction to take it in, you can sort of play around with it and do that as well. So yeah, there's definitely, outside of the contact time, you would be wanting to spend time on the course as well.
Cool, thank you. So the next question from Joe is asking, could you give a breakdown of the projects that are completed throughout the course? Kay, could you start on this one, please?
Yeah, you're really testing me here, Joe. Okay, so I'll run through them. So we start off with a mystery project that you use the command line to solve. There are then 10 increasingly tricky Ruby exercises. After this, you use test-driven development to build a sort of model airport. After this, you build a piece of backend software for a sort of takeaway. Of course, this is all building the foundations of programming. Then onto a rock, paper, scissors web app. Then onto a clone for twitter.com, you may have heard of it. Then onto a bowling scorecard, which is very, very tricky stuff around, you ever tried to score bowling? It's actually quite difficult. And then after that, you're building a sort of Airbnb style website, putting all of this together. And then beyond this, an engineering project in which you build as a team, in a genuine sort of engineering team sort of way. You have a board of tickets, you pull stuff off, you build a clone of Facebook. So actually you're really building the last 10 years of internet infrastructure. And then all of this finishes off with a project that actually you and your team can define what you would like to build and what stack you'd like to build it in. And we get everything from like iOS apps through to like slightly drier things like building banking systems in Java, through to like I think at the moment actually you're working on, and your team is working on a sort of injection game in theme with the current.
Yes, a sort of syringe versus some viruses little game.
Yeah.
TBC what it looks like at the end.
I'm sure it'll look great. So that's the whole thing, and actually plenty more. And it's as much as you want to make it. Quite honestly, many people have built many other things as well.
Cool, great stuff. So the next question is for Ellen. They're asking, how would you recommend preparing for the bootcamp, looking back at your experience?
That is a really good question, and I'm trying to cast my mind back to sort of how I did sort of prepare or not prepare for it. So on a sort of practical, like thinking about it technically, there's prep that obviously you are sort of instructed to do around kind of doing the Codecademy Ruby course, and doing some of the Code Wars kata. The one thing I would say is I think I got myself a bit down a rabbit hole with the kata, in that I find that Code Wars does start to tend towards problems that are as much mathematical as they are coding. It depends, if you look around and find the right ones, that they stay quite fun. But there are a few out there that are quite mathsy, and that could be, I think, a little bit off-putting. So I'd just say, choose your kata carefully as you practice your way through Code Wars. But I do think Code Wars was really helpful. The other thing that I enjoyed doing was kind of trying to come up with like little micro projects that I could try my coding out with. So back when I was still playing with Python, I built, this will just sound so nerdy. I built a little web scraper that I would ask my library, my local library's catalogue, if it had a particular book, and then it fed back the results into a CSV, so I could feed it a list of books that I was interested in and find out if they had it. But having something like that kind of, it's not big, it's not fancy. You can build it scrappily. You're not trying to make it perfect. It's just something that you can try your skills out with is a really good idea. The other thing I'd sort of say in terms of prepping for the part-time course especially, is, and I did this a little bit and I could have possibly done it more, is to just really try and plan and reflect on how you're going to look after yourself through the course. And by that I mean kind of working out what are the important things that you need to make sure that you're keeping time for, and how you can, get your friends and family to support you with that. And if the thing that you need to do to kind of decompress at the end of the day is, reading a book or watching some Netflix, or baking biscuits in your kitchen because it's something away from a screen, it's trying to work out what are some of those things that you're going to use as tools to kind of restore your energy and make sure that your life isn't just job or whatever your day-to-day commitments are into coding, and then basically breaking things up from being a daily grind. So having a think about what are your ways of taking care of yourself, so that you've kind of got those in the bag ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a really, really important part of the course, and something that kind of shouldn't be taken lightly, because it obviously is a very sort of intense kind of 7 months that you'll be going through. Just to add anything at all, Rachel, aside from the kind of standard resources that Ellen's touched on there, is there anything from your perspective and from what the admissions team would look at that's kind of any additional prep from what people might have read online?
I think those are the main things. And I think when you're sort of starting out, you don't want to sort of overload yourself with too many things. So if you have done the Code Academy and you've done the Code Wars and you're looking for something extra, then reach out to us rather than me telling you loads of stuff, because there definitely are some books we can recommend. But start with these things, and if you're struggling, even if you haven't applied yet, you can just reach out to us and we'll sort of, hopefully be able to give some tips and some more things to have a look at.
Cool, thank you. So the next one is asking, what is the supply and demand situation looking like in the industry at the moment? Are there more coders than there are jobs, or not enough? Kay, if you have this one, please.
Thanks, Triple W. It's a great handle. So when COVID hit, the job market definitely changed. There's no two ways about it. Things got a bit harder as companies decided to take stock and see what they were thinking they were going to do. And things have definitely changed since then, and the market is much busier now on the job side. However, it's still a bit cooler than it was. And so what we did at this time is we invested much more into helping people, because what we found is that employers, they did still need talent, but they were less willing to perhaps take a chance on a candidate who hadn't quite gotten the skills yet, and sort of hope that maybe they would pick them up on the job. They were really looking for people who had the skills before they then hired them. And so what happens now is we work with people up to the point at which they get those skills, even if it takes longer than the course. So we work with people for up to a year now after the course, so that they can make sure that they can reach that standard. And for people with a solid set of skills in what employers are looking for, which is what we train for, actually the market is very healthy, and we see that people get jobs all the time and in the vast majority of cases.
Cool, thank you very much. So the next question is for Ellen, and they're asking, is there anything that you would have done differently? And also, how does pair programming work?
Good questions. Anything I would have done differently? I think our coach was very keen towards the start of the course that we kind of kept a sort of learning log of kind of how we were progressing through the course. And I'll hold my hands up and say it's entirely my fault that at some point a couple of months in, that really just sort of drifted to the bottom of the to-do list and then fell off the bottom. I think I would have if I could go back and give myself some advice, I'd say like keep up with it. It would, it's worth the time and the effort to do that, even though it can feel like it's just one more thing to fit in. Just because I think it would have been quite useful to have, looking back, and particularly in this sort of final project where there's less, there aren't sort of as many resources that you can point at and say, oh, well, that's what I've learned this week. It would have been good to kind of maintain that discipline. So I think that's my personal kind of what I would have done differently. And then the other part of the question was, how does the pair programming work? So we do it at the moment over Zoom. So we just split off into sort of Zoom calls and share our screen. And we generally change pairs every evening. We had a short period where we tried changing pairs every couple of evenings, which worked occasionally in specific circumstances, but generally it's been quite nice to kind of swap around who we've been pairing with more often, just kind of get a feel for different people's approaches to code and different chances to sort of talk about ideas in different ways. And yeah, we don't tend to use kind of like handing over control of your screen to other people tools. We found, like, certainly our cohort found that we had latency issues there that just meant that it was quite painful. Kind of, you'd see someone put a typo on your screen, you'd be like, oh, there's a typo, but they were already fixing it by the time they heard you saying that. So we've tended to work more in a kind of like the person who's sharing their screen is the person who's driving, so typing the code, and the person who's not sharing their screen is navigating. And then whenever there's kind of like a test passing or a natural pause, kind of we can commit that code up to GitHub, which is just a sort of central place that the code is stored, and swap over, and the other person can then pull like the latest version of the code and continue work on it with them sharing their screen. So that's that's the sort of practicalities of how we've made it work.
Cool, thank you very much. So the next question is kind of the other side to that, the previous one. So Gaia is asking, is there anything that makers would do differently from the first part-time course to the one we have starting in April? Okay, please.
Yes, I think the number one thing is actually a bit more flexibility with the timings. I think what we found is that particularly with people who, perhaps even despite COVID still had a commute or had commitments, they, actually the timings that we initially had, which I think we were due to start at 6, didn't really work for some people. And in fact, having Friday and Saturday as the specified days for this independent work, also actually we can make that a bit more flexible. So we start slightly later now, and actually the 4 to 8 hours a week that we recommend for independent study, those can be done at any point, not just on Fridays and Saturdays. So we've tightened up the schedule a little bit, so that I guess to accommodate more sorts of people. So I think that's one of the main things that we've changed.
Cool, thank you, Kate. So I'm going to stay with you actually for the next one. So Ade is saying they really want to career change, but they're worried that they might not get a job out of Makers. What are the chances of not getting a job after the course and paying £8,000? Yeah,
I mean, I totally understand your apprehension on that. I mean, sometimes I think of the people who study with this, and the journey they decide to go on, I think is really inspiring, actually. And I think you can only really know this for yourself. Actually, there are some people who after our course don't get a job, or don't get a job for quite some time, the minority, but it does happen. And I think it's something you've really got to figure out for yourself. And the thing that I would really emphasize is work out whether you like this work and whether you have the appetite for this work up front. Do some coding, try it out, see how it goes. Do you make progress? And then, you know, keep up a dialogue with Rachel and admissions and even myself. I'm Kay at makers.tech, always happy to have a conversation with anyone who's thinking, oh, I've done this, I'm not really sure if it's working. You know, could you give me some advice? Always happy to. But if you do find actually that you really take to this work and you like doing it and you grow fast when you're doing it and putting in the time, actually this is a really great option for you. And for the vast majority, of course, you know, life always happens with some people and some people have to take a different path. But for the vast majority of people who do go on that good path, actually they get what they're looking for. So do the due diligence on us, on yourself also, and on your own learning, and trust in yourself, really, and trust in us.
Cool, thank you, Kay. So Rachel, the next question for you, please, is Jess is asking, what is the pre-admission timeline like? Not including the work we do after admission, but before day one. So I'm guessing kind of like how long it should take somebody to prepare. If I've not understood that right, Jess, please drop another question so we can answer it fully.
Yeah, nice. So I would say the two resources that we talked about, the Code Academy and Code Wars, it's going to vary from like person to person, how long it takes you and how much time you have to give to the resources, especially if you are working like full time and trying to do the resources. But I would say probably roughly between like 2 and 4 weeks it takes people to work through them. Obviously, if you do have more time to, like Kay said, you know, explore coding, make sure it's for you. Obviously, there is a little bit more time that you can take, but on average, yeah, 2 to 4 weeks for the main resources to work through. So yeah, I think that is what you're after, Jess, but let us know if we haven't covered it.
Oh, thank you. So the next question from Joe is asking, what is the cohort size and how are you matched with pair partners? I think Ellen covered a little bit of how the pair programming works. In terms of cohort size, Rachel, is there a specific number that will be in the next cohort?
Yeah, I think we're going to be looking to have like 20 to 24 people on the cohort, so sort of like the same as our full-time course. And yeah, you're matched with your pair partner sort of like automatically. There's a bot that will sort of let you know who your partner is for that day.
Ooh, thank you. The next question from Jess. I don't understand because I'm not technical at all. Kay, does the course tackle big O notation at all?
Yeah, really interesting question, because the answer is no, not formally, although we do have some materials for it, which you can access. It's just not something we cover in the main path. But as it happens, because all of our coaches are professional software engineers, or you know, were before they were coaches, actually we can have a conversation about anything, and we challenge our coaches always to be able to do that. And so I was having a conversation with someone on the part-time course, a current student actually, who was asking me about big O notation and algorithmic complexity, and had a bunch of HackerRank exercises, which they were sort of like, my HackerRank exercise going too slow. Why is this? I was like, big O notation. Here's what it looks like. And then, you know, so we had that conversation. And if you're interested in it, we can always talk about it and always cover it.
I'm glad that was actually a real thing. I was like, I've got no idea if it's a typo. Like,
promise you.
So hopefully that answers your question, Jess. So the next question from Nasir was asking, is the part-time course job guaranteed? We don't have a job offer guarantee, but hopefully from kind of Kay's previous answer, she's explained some of the support that we offer in that respect. And it costs £8,000, which is the same as our regular bootcamp course. Cool, so the next question from John is asking, for those who are still interested in a career change and want to learn but are still working full time, would we consider carrying on the part-time boot camps post-COVID? Kay, could you help with that, please?
Yes, I think that this is actually a really great offering for people with careers or jobs already. Not everyone can just totally quit their job and then go and study full time. And actually, I think it's a really, really interesting journey. And stories like Ellen's actually show, some of the positive outcomes that you could never really see on a full time sort of quit your job up front boot camp. So to call back for those who knew, Ellen got a job with her current employer as a software engineer after not being a software engineer before, which is really great. So yes, actually, I think it's a really great thing and a really great opportunity. So we're looking to continue it.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, I guess like just to sort of like add to that, where as a company, I think we're always kind of very committed to diversity and trying to make it as accessible to sort of as many people as possible. So kind of changing the format and timings of our delivery has been one way to kind of help us to do that. So yeah, obviously it's something that, we hope we can kind of continue to offer going forward. Cool. So the next question from Nick. Sorry, Kate, there's going to be quite a few for you in a row, so be ready to answer. Nick is asking, what qualifications or experience do we require coaches to have? And do we employ Makers alumni? And if so, what experience do they need after graduating?
Yeah, well, if you're a Makers alumni, Nick, then do get in touch. But in terms of qualifications and experience, we don't require any specific qualifications for coaches, but we do require that our coaches are software engineers, and usually we only look to hire people as coaches with at least 2 years industry experience. It ranges as high as 10 on our coaching team, 10 years industry experience, but 2 is usually the minimum we consider, although we do have exceptions for people who, for instance, just are really passionate about education or have previous educational experience, in which case we would consider people. But yeah, it's really actually important to me that all coaches have what I call technical fearlessness, which is even if they don't know the language, even if they don't know the project, they can always come in and feel confident in helping you solve whatever problem you come across. And so that's something we screen for really rigorously with our coaches. 2 different technical tests, an education test. We have them in to observe them coaching people, and it's it's a really important process for us because it's the heart of what we do. So that's our approach to staffing our team.
Cool, thank you. I'm going to throw in a question because I can. It's going to be one for Ellen, actually. Just earlier, you touched on sort of how you prepared for the course and mentioned, looking after your sort of well-being and making sure you're in the kind of like mindset to kind of balance the work with your life and that kind of thing. Would you be able to share us all just sort of how you managed that, what support from Makers there was and that kind of thing? Because I think that can be really helpful to sort of future students.
Yeah, so at the start of the course, we had a couple of sessions with Dana, who's previously been mentioned, the Chief Joy Officer, and she was sort of specifically kind of talking to us about kind of strategies for looking after ourselves, kind of identifying kind of what we need to kind of rest and relax, because some people that's socializing, some people that's sitting in a darkened room quietly on their own, and then kind of alongside that there's daily meditation sessions. Those do happen kind of in what for me are work hours, so I don't get to those, but I've been to some of the yoga sessions which happen in the evenings just before our course hours start, which was really enjoyable and a good way of kind of not sitting hunched at a desk all day. And then I think in terms of sort of what Makers have provided for that, it's been the structure of our course days is that there's always been time at the start to kind of just chat socially before we kind of get started. So we, properly sort of checking in on everybody to see how they're doing, just asking like how people's days have been, if there's any sort of funny stories that people have got. It helps you sort of switch over modes from like your work day or whatever else you've got on into like being on the course. And that's been really valuable.
Cool, thank you so much, Ellen. So the next question is asking, what is the job market like for older career changes? And is there much age discrimination from employers? Sorry, Kay, would you be able to help with that as well? Thanks.
Thanks. I'll be honest with you, I've seen it. Yeah, I think there is some, and it's a real shame. It's something that absolutely shouldn't happen. It should be that if you have the skills and the passion, you should be considered for that job the same as everyone else. And that's something that I firmly believe. It's something that everyone at Makers believes. And it's something that we work with our partners on improving them all the time. So that's my honest answer. I've seen it, it shouldn't happen, and we're on your side when it comes to making sure that doesn't happen with you.
Cool, thank you, Kate. So the next question is asking, have we seen a difference in learning between full-time and part-time students? And by that, they mean the rate of intake of information and essentially, like, yeah, how they pick up concepts and that type of thing. So, okay, I'm going to stick with you, please.
Yeah. This is a really interesting. I often sort of wondered about this question when we piloted this course, and what I've noticed actually is that the adjusting for the time frame, the progress is actually faster. Is what I've noticed. It's not faster in all areas. There are some things that are still a little bit tricky to pick up if you're working purely in the evenings. For instance, if you have a really large and meaty project, there's always that thing where you have to sort of get into it again every day, which we're working to overcome and actually have seen some good results from. But actually, when it comes to the intake of information and concepts, particularly around the early points of the course, we were sort of surprised. We thought we were going to run out of work for these people, or you know, we might have to like add in some extra stuff. Yeah, it's a little bit different, but actually, I don't think it's worse. It's just different.
If I can chip in briefly, I think. I mean, obviously, I don't know what it's like studying it full time, but on the part-time course, you do have a bit more space to kind of let the ideas settle, which I think actually can really help with conceptual learning. In my experience, it's sort of, yes, your study time is a little bit more broken up, and you're coming to it, you know, with perhaps less energy than you would do if you started your, you would starting your day at 9 a.m. if you're a morning person. But having that sort of space between the sessions to really kind of like let the idea just kind of bubble in your brain and think can actually really help it settle, and little puzzles that you had from one evening, you might find by the next evening you've actually come up with a solution.
Cool, thank you both. Lovely. So the next one from Richard is asking, do you have any advice or resources available that will help determine whether a dev career and a bootcamp is suited to a prospective student? Rachel, is there anything you can recommend?
I think just trying coding in general is a good idea, like we've sort of said previously. I know that sort of like logical thinking is often needed to be sort of a developer as well. So I know that Alice, one of our coaches, has recommended an app called Luminosity. So it's not a coding based app, but it's a logic based app where it gets you to sort of think outside the box, which I'm sure Ellen can say that she's done a lot of during the course. So yeah, perhaps that, but I'm not sure how you can, without sort of like doing the course, really find out, I guess, until you've sort of tried being part of a team. And yeah, I think just sort of doing your research about boot camps and how we teach, and trying coding, perhaps joining a coding group. Obviously you can't meet up at the moment, but there's different coding groups that sort of will meet virtually. So chatting to some developers, maybe trying to chat to some Makers alumni to sort of get their perspective, and do they sort of start off at a similar place to you, so that you can sort of get a good picture, I guess, of lots of different aspects of what becoming a developer sort of looks like and what it's like to do a bootcamp.
Thanks, Rachel. I think if you joined after the start of the call as well, I think Ellen mentioned a couple of, like projects you'd been doing in your own time and kind of building a few different things and, setting yourselves tasks like that. So I think if you enjoy, creating those kind of things, that's quite a good test if you're doing that in your sort of, leisure time to test yourself. It's probably quite a good sign. I'll also do a little plug for our Learn Coding community. Basically, if you're familiar with Slack, we have a Slack community where you can join us and chat to other people who are preparing to either join makers or just learn to code. We've got some of our staff and previous students in there as well. So if you kind of want a soundboard off of different people, of just, where you're at with your coding and, what kind of thought process you're going through, hopefully some people in that community will be able to help. I'm going to send an email after this with kind of the main information that all of our panelists have shared. So if you've missed any of the kind of like resources or anything that we've mentioned, just look out for that, and hopefully you'll be able to find everything you need from today's session. Cool, I'm going to move on to our next question. Richard is asking, how often are we planning to start cohorts, and do we have another one planned after April? Not one planned at the moment, but I believe, as Kay said, there will be some in the future.
Yeah, at the moment we're thinking 1 or 2 a year, I think.
Awesome. Okay, great. So the next question is asking, is there a likelihood of needing to relocate for a job after the end of the course, or is that a thing of the past?
I suppose it depends where you live currently and what the job market is like there. London is pretty buoyant. We certainly wouldn't require you to relocate, although you might choose to, depending on where you live and what the sort of tech centres near you are. But feel free to reach out, with more specifics, and we can give you some advice.
Cool, thank you. So the next question is slightly different from the ones that we've had so far today. So they're asking, how has the learning process been for students with learning difficulties, such as dyspraxia? Are there any considerations or techniques that that we employ to help students overcome challenges that they might face? Kate, could you help with that one, please?
Yeah, so I don't think we quite have enough data on part-time specifically for this question. But in general, I've worked with students, for instance, with dyslexia, with other sorts of learning difficulties. And I think it really depends on the individual. And so what we do is, towards the beginning of the course, we'll ask you to let us know if there's anything that we should be aware of that we can take into account to improve your journey. And then we will identify the things that have worked for you in the past, because of course we work with adults, and so people have had a history of managing these things in the way they feel best, and then adapting what we do to fit that. And so actually I've worked with students who really preferred to have written material, and they would go through this, and a lot of our materials are written. Some people prefer spoken material, some people prefer to be working things out practically, or maybe not even to engage that much with text up front, but to just do a little bit and then get working, and then come back perhaps when they've come to a certain point in the code. So we're actually have a luxury that, because we employ professional developers as coaches, and because our cohorts aren't massive in the same way a university would be, we're able to adapt to individuals. So that would be our approach.
Well, thank you, Kate. Lovely. So the next question we have is asking, will there be a financing schedule, will there be a financing schedule, or will payment have to be made upfront? Rachel, could you help with that, please?
Yeah, good question. So at the moment, we ask for an £800 deposit, which sort of secures your space on the cohort. And then the final fees are due when you sort of start the course. If you're wanting to sort of like discuss options further, we can definitely do that as sort of the application process. So yeah, just reach out if you want some more information on that.
Cool, thank you. And the last one that we have in the Q&A today is asking, what's the average time taken to find a job after course completion? I guess it's worth mentioning that obviously with COVID in mind, as Kay mentioned before, things have been like a little bit different. But is there kind of like a rough guidance you'd be able to give people at this point?
Yeah, so before COVID, and I'm I'm definitely hoping that we get back to this point. We ask people to allow 3 months for their job hunt. I think it's probably fair to say that we should you should allow 6 months at this point. For some people, it takes a little bit longer. For a lot of people, it takes a shorter time, and actually, a lot of it depends on perhaps how much time you have to devote to the work. Some people have only a thin slice of time; it takes them longer. Some people can really focus on it and get done sooner. But there's a wide range of different durations actually that it takes at the moment with in the wake of COVID. And of course the market's actually still changing. In the past couple of weeks, we've seen it really recover from businesses shutting down in December. So I would plan for a wide range of outcomes, and also just make sure, I suppose, that when you're practicing, when you're doing your coding, you're sure that it's you're seeing a good pace of learning from yourself, and we can help you assess that as well.
Cool, thank you. There's a final one that's snuck in, so I'm going to answer it while we're all here. So Prav is asking, what's the best programming languages to learn, and free resources online to use to see if it's a suitable career. Ellen, I guess aside from the ones that you mentioned, is there anything else that you think is worth sharing with kind of prospective students?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend trying to sort of learn other languages before the course, just because that context switch is tricky. But if you are someone who likes the idea of that challenge, I actually really value the time I spent learning Python, which is another. So when I was looking around in my furlough, I was like, what language should I try? And there was sort of a bunch of people saying Ruby and a bunch of people saying Python. I flipped a coin and picked Python. And there's basically different languages kind of come with different, always kind of cultures with them, different things that they emphasize, different things that they're particularly good at or clear about. And one of the things that I loved about Python was it really forces you to get your layout of your code really good, which is something that if you have the habit of is going to stand you in such good stead. So, if you do want to muck around in other languages, there's lots of really good resources out there. Codecademy is always just a kind of go-to starting point because it takes you through the language, the syntax really quite clearly. But particularly with sort of Ruby and with Python, if you just sort of Google sort of beginners tutorials, there's lots of little exercises out there that you can try. A lot of people have put time and effort into resources for those languages because they are seen as good gateways into the code. I think I'd recommend those rather than sort of, I think there's another question in there about someone asking about JavaScript, and my experience of sort of swapping to JavaScript mid-course was, I'm glad I didn't start there. You could start there, but it would be tougher and it would be perhaps a bit less enjoyable. Personally, that'd be my personal take.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. So hopefully we've covered all bases, and thank you for jumping in, Kay, and answering our last question. Cool. So I'm gonna wrap it up there for everybody today. I know there's a lot of information that we've shared, so hopefully it's kind of helps clarify your decision a little bit. But as I said, you can always reach out to myself, Kay, or Rachel. It's just our names at makers.tech, or just reply to the kind of follow-up email. You'll get links to some of the resources that we mentioned, our own coding community, and a couple of the events that we mentioned as well. So yeah, hopefully they'll help you on your coding journey. Right, that's everything from us today. Have a good evening. All right, thanks everybody.